"You can't dig up this road," Ryan Vance yelled, his voice strained over the roar of a backhoe idling just inches from the asphalt. I didn't get up from my porch chair. I just pointed to the neon orange safety signs and held up a certified municipal utility permit next to a yellow deed from 1925, 6 months before that backhoe started tearing into the main entrance of Oak Ridge Valley Plaza. I was sitting at a corner booth in my dad's diner, staring at a spreadsheet that made absolutely no sense. My name is Arthur Pendleton. For 25 years, I worked as a senior commercial lease auditor for corporate retail groups. If a landlord tried to slip a fake janitorial fee or an unapproved roof repair bill into a tenant's monthly invoice, I was the guy who caught it. I've read thousands of commercial leases, and I know exactly where the bills are padded in triple net calculations. But in 2025, my dad, Richard, was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. He had run Pendleton's Oak Ridge Grill in this exact spot since 1974. The diner is a local institution in our corner of Northern California. People come for the hickory-smoked brisket and the fact that we still bake our own pies daily. It's a cash-flowing, honest business. My dad didn't want to sell, and I didn't want him to. So, I took early retirement from the corporate grind and stepped in to run the place. The plaza itself was a typical mid-70s suburban strip mall. It had a dry cleaner run by the Patels, a hardware store owned by Old Man Henderson, a local bakery, and our diner on the far end. For 50 years, the plaza had been owned by a local family who kept the rents reasonable and treated tenants like partners. Then, they sold it. The buyer was Vance Capital REIT, a real estate investment trust known for buying suburban strip malls, squeezing the tenants out, and redeveloping the land into high-density luxury apartments. The man they put in charge of our plaza was Ryan Vance. He was 34, wore tailored suits that looked ridiculously out of place in our dusty parking lot, and had an MBA from a school he wouldn't stop talking about. He wasn't a shouting cartoon villain. He was a cold, spreadsheet-driven analyst who viewed tenants as temporary obstacles to his yield targets. His uncle was one of the major shareholders in the REIT, which explained how a guy with zero operational experience got to run a multi-million-dollar portfolio. 2 weeks after Vance Capital took over, we received our first monthly triple net invoice under the new management. In commercial real estate, a triple net lease, or NNN, means the tenant pays their base rent, plus a pro rata share of the property taxes, building insurance, and common area maintenance, which we call CAM. For 50 years, our NNN charges hovered around $2,500 a month. It was fair. It paid for the parking lot lights, trash pickup, and basic landscaping. The new invoice from Vance Capital was $7,500. I stared at the paper. A 300% increase overnight. I looked at the line item breakdown. They had charged us for parking lot resurfacing amortization at $45,000, a security services surcharge of $12,000, and a sewer main infrastructure upgrade of $350,000, split across the tenants. I walked down to the hardware store and found Henderson staring at a similar invoice. The Patels were in tears at the dry cleaner. Vance was hitting every single small tenant with these astronomical numbers. I knew exactly what he was doing. Under California commercial tenancy laws, if a tenant defaults on their rent or NNN charges, the landlord can initiate eviction proceedings. Vance couldn't evict us directly because we all had long-term leases with 5 to 10 years remaining. So he was fabricating NNN charges to force us into a financial corner, hoping we would either default or voluntarily walk away so he could bulldoze the plaza. But Vance didn't know who he was dealing with. He thought he was dealing with a bunch of tired, uneducated small business owners who would just roll over. I spent the next 3 days in our office with a calculator, a yellow legal pad, and my dad's original 1974 lease agreement. The lease was a beauty. It was drafted back when agreements were simple but solid. Under Clause 12, capital improvements, like completely repaving a parking lot or replacing a municipal sewer main, were strictly the landlord's financial responsibility unless they were amortized over a 15-year period under standard guidelines. Even then, the tenant's share had to be capped at a maximum annual increase of 3%. Vance was trying to bill us for the entire upfront cost of these projects in a single fiscal year. On top of that, I did a quick search on the security firm he hired, Shield Guard LLC. The business registration records showed the company was incorporated just 3 weeks prior, and the registered agent was Ryan Vance's cousin. They were paying $12,000 a month for a security guard who never showed up, pocketing the cash and passing the bill directly to the tenants. I drafted a formal dispute letter, citing the lease clauses and demanding a full audit of the CAM invoices, complete with certified contractor receipts. I signed it, put it in a certified mail envelope, and drove to the management office. I was ready for a fight, but I had no idea just how dirty Ryan Vance was willing to play. The leasing office had been remodeled with cold, gray marble and glass partitions that felt more like a bank than a local management office. I walked in, carrying my legal pad and the audit demand letter, and was escorted to Ryan Vance's private office. Vance was sitting behind a polished glass desk, tapping away on a thin laptop. He didn't look up for a full minute, a classic power play I'd seen 100 times from junior executives. When he finally did, he gave me a tight, insincere smile. I laid out the audit demand letter. I didn't waste time on small talk. I pointed to the NNN invoice and explained that under Clause 12 of our lease, capital improvements like resurfacing a parking lot could not be passed through as operating expenses. I also pointed out that Shield Guard LLC was a newly formed entity registered under his cousin's name, which was a clear conflict of interest. Vance steepled his fingers, his expression completely blank. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, his voice quiet and measured, "you're a retired auditor. You don't work for a corporate conglomerate anymore. This is a local strip mall, and Vance Capital is a multi-million-dollar fund. We have a team of lawyers on retainer who eat guys like you for breakfast. If you can't pay the NNN fees, you're in material breach of your lease. It's that simple." I pointed to the lease document on the desk. "Under this lease, you cannot pass through capital expenses as CAM. I am requesting the last 3 years of CAM invoices, general ledger entries, and vendor contracts. You have 10 business days to comply under state law." Vance's face hardened. He slid the papers back across the desk toward me. "Let me make this simple for you, Arthur. We don't do audits, and we don't negotiate. You have 3 days to pay the outstanding NNN balance. If you don't, we will declare a default and reclaim the property. If you don't like it, pack up your kitchen and get out." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just picked up my papers, stood up, and walked out. Instead of paying Vance Capital directly, I went straight to my bank. I set up an escrow account under the name of the diner. I deposited the full base rent of $4,000, plus our historical NNN fee of $2,500. I withheld the disputed $5,000 of fake charges. Then, I had my attorney draft a formal notice of rent escrow, explaining that the undisputed funds were secured and would be released the moment Vance Capital provided the legally required CAM audit documents. We sent it via certified mail. Vance's response was swift, calculated, and incredibly illegal. He didn't use steel chains. He knew that would look too much like an illegal lockout in a courtroom. Instead, he chose a method he thought was legally bulletproof. On Thursday morning, I pulled into the plaza parking lot at 4:30 a.m. It was pitch black, and the air was cold. As I walked up to the diner's double doors, I noticed 2 private security guards standing next to a stack of bright yellow metal barricades. Taped to our glass doors was a neon red placard from the city building safety department. It was an emergency structural hazard notice. It claimed that an inspection conducted the previous afternoon had revealed critical structural deterioration in the diner's roof trusses, posing an immediate collapse hazard. The building was declared unsafe for occupancy, and the power and gas had been disconnected for public safety. 10 minutes later, my dad's old blue pickup truck pulled into the parking space next to mine. He got out, his hands shaking slightly from the Parkinsons, holding a box of fresh aprons. He looked at the red notice on the door, then at the security guards blocking the entrance, and then at me. His eyes went watery. 50 years of his life, 50 years of working 60-hour weeks, of building a community, and now he was shut down by a piece of paper claiming his building was a death trap. "Arthur," he whispered, his voice trembling, "what did we do wrong?" "Nothing, Dad," I said, putting my arm around his shoulders. "We did everything right." I looked at the security guards. "Who authorized the inspection?" "City Inspector Donald Brooks," one of the guards said, refusing to look me in the eye. "We're just here to enforce the perimeter. Nobody goes inside." I knew Donald Brooks. He was a senior inspector who had been under investigation twice by the city for taking kickbacks from local developers. I immediately took out my phone and called a contact at Apex Engineering, a licensed structural firm in Walnut Creek. I paid them a double-rate emergency fee to get a senior engineer out to the diner by 8 a.m. Since the exterior of the building was public space, The engineer was able to inspect the exterior load-bearing walls and use a high-resolution thermal imaging camera to scan the roof trusses from the alley. Within 2 hours, he handed me a certified report. The roof trusses were perfectly sound. They had been reinforced with steel plates in 2012 when we replaced the HVAC unit. There was absolutely no deterioration. The city gnosis was a complete fabrication. Ryan Vance had used Brooks to orchestrate a fraudulent shutdown to force us out, bypassing the courts entirely. Under California law, this was a constructive eviction and civil conspiracy. I looked at the barricades and the security guards. I felt a strange sense of peace. Ryan Vance thought he had played the perfect corporate hand. He thought he had used the city's power to destroy us without leaving his fingerprints. But he had just handed us the rope to hang his entire career. While Ryan Vance was probably celebrating his quick lockout in some upscale restaurant, I spent the afternoon at the Contra Costa County Recorder's office in Martinez. The building smells of old paper, dust, and floor wax. If you want to trace land records in California before the 1970s, you can't rely on a simple Google search or the public online database. The online systems are mostly populated by digitized records from the mid-80s onward. To find the real history, you have to go to the basement, look through the physical ledger books, and scroll through microfilm rolls. I sat in front of a flickering microfilm reader for 4 hours, cross-referencing parcel numbers. The modern assessor's parcel map showed our diner as parcel 102 and the plaza as parcel 103. The access road, a 30-foot wide strip of asphalt that ran from the public highway, Oak Ridge Boulevard, directly into the plaza's parking lot, was marked on the modern map as part of the plaza's common area. But maps can be deceiving. What matters is the chain of title. I went back to the old tract maps of 1925. Back then, the entire area was 40 acres of walnut orchards owned by my grandfather, Edward Pendleton. In October of 1925, he sold 39 acres to a land developer who wanted to build a suburban neighborhood, which later became the plaza and the surrounding streets. But my grandfather was a stubborn man. He kept 1 acre at the corner of the highway to build a family home and a small roadside fruit stand, the exact location that eventually became the diner. And he kept fee simple ownership of that 30-foot wide strip of land running along the edge of his property. The developer needed that strip to access the inner acreage from the main road. I found the document. Book 142 of Deeds, page 88. It was a deed of easement. I printed out the page on the county's industrial copier. The ink was faded, written in elegant cursive script. I sat at a long wooden table and read it word for word twice. My grandfather had granted the developer a non-exclusive easement for ingress and egress, a right-of-way, over that 30-foot strip, but he had inserted a defeasance clause, a legal self-defense mechanism. The covenant stated that the developer and all future owners of the inner tract were solely responsible for maintaining, paving, and clearing the access road. It explicitly stated, no maintenance charges, assessments, or fees of any kind related to this strip of land shall ever be assessed against the grantor or his heirs. Then came the second clause. The deed granted the Pendleton family the absolute, non-revocable right of re-entry to the access road to maintain, repair, or replace any utility lines running beneath the surface. It explicitly allowed the family to temporarily close the road for essential utility repairs on their fee simple land. Upon giving a 10-day notice, Ryan Vance, in his hurry to squeeze us out, had repaved the parking lot and the access road. To inflate our NNN bill, he had split the cost of that repaving across all the tenants. In our NNN invoice, under line item 4, he had written, access road resurfacing, $15,000. By charging us for the maintenance of our own land, Vance had directly violated the 1925 covenant, and by using a fraudulent city building inspector to lock us out, he had committed a civil conspiracy. I packed up my photocopies, walked out of the recorder's office, and called Marcus Sterling. Marcus was a classmate of mine from college and a partner at a commercial real estate firm in Oakland. He knew property litigation inside and out. 2 hours later, I was in Marcus's office on the 20th floor, overlooking the bay. I laid the 1925 deed next to Ryan Vance's NNN invoice and the photos of the safety hazard notice on our doors. Marcus read the documents, leaning back in his chair. He let out a low whistle. Arthur, Marcus said, rubbing his chin, this is gold. Vance Capital REIT must have run a standard title search. When a commercial property is sold, the title insurance company usually only goes back 40 years to check for clear title. It's a standard industry practice to save time and money. They saw the asphalt road, saw it was used for 50 years, and assumed it was a standard easement appurtenant with no restrictions. They completely missed Book 142, page 88. Can we enforce the revocation, I asked? We can, Marcus said, but if we just try to block the road based on the NNN breach, their lawyers will fight it for months, arguing it's a minor covenant breach that can be compensated by damages. Courts hate forfeitures of property rights. We need a faster, more surgical strike. He pointed to the utility clause in the 1925 deed. You said your sewer main and grease trap lines run directly under that access road to connect to the municipal main on Oak Ridge Boulevard, right? Yes, I replied. The main line was installed in 1974. It hasn't been inspected in 15 years. Perfect. Marcus smiled. We hire Apex Engineering to run a camera down the sewer line. We find a minor leak, which is practically guaranteed in a 50-year-old pipe. We notify the city environmental health department of a potential wastewater hazard. Then, under the 1925 deed's utility clause, we serve Vance Capital REIT with a 10-day notice that we are exercising our right of re-entry to dig up the access road for essential utility repairs. Because you own the land in fee simple, and the deed explicitly allows temporary road closure for utilities, they cannot stop you. We also file the quiet title action and the civil fraud lawsuit against the REIT and Inspector Brooks. The plan was brilliant. It wasn't a spiteful blockade. It was a legally mandated utility repair to prevent a municipal environmental violation. We hired the engineers. As expected, the camera scan showed root intrusion and minor joint leaks in the clay pipes beneath the access road. I immediately obtained a municipal utility repair permit from the City Public Works Department. Meanwhile, Marcus filed the quiet title action and the fraud lawsuit in the Contra Costa County Superior Court. When the lawsuit was served, the first place Vance Capital REIT went was to their title insurance provider, Fidelity National Title. When Fidelity's legal department pulled the 1925 deed from the basement archives, absolute panic set in. They realized that, because they had missed the deed restriction in their original title policy, they were on the hook for the entire $15 million value of the redevelopment project if the access road was lost. On Friday morning, we had our preliminary hearing. The court was packed with lawyers from the REIT and the title insurance company. Judge Evelyn Ramirez looked down at us from the dais. She adjusted her glasses, reviewing our independent engineering reports and the city utility permit. Counsel, Judge Ramirez said, looking at the REIT's attorney. The plaintiff has a municipal permit to excavate their own fee simple land to repair a leaking sewer line that runs under the plaza's access road. The 1925 deed explicitly reserves the right of temporary road closure for such repairs. What is your legal objection to this repair? The REIT's attorney stood up, sweating slightly. Your Honor, blocking the access road will completely shut down the plaza. It will prevent construction vehicles from entering. We ask for an order forcing the plaintiff to use directional drilling instead of open trench excavation. Directional drilling is twice as expensive and structurally unfeasible due to the clay soil conditions, Marcus countered. My client has the legal right to choose the method of repair on his own land, especially when it is backed by a city permit. Furthermore, the landlord's hands are unclean. They have locked my client out of his restaurant using a fraudulent safety hazard report signed by an inspector who is now under internal investigation. Judge Ramirez didn't hesitate. She looked at the REIT's team. I am not going to prevent a property owner from repairing a utility line that could cause a public health hazard, she announced, signing the court order. The plaintiff is authorized to proceed with the excavation. The access road may be closed for the duration of the repairs, not to exceed 14 days. I suggest your client uses this time to review their lease agreements and their title policy. I stood up, shaking Marcus's hand. We had the permit. We had the court order, and the contractors were already loading the backhoes. By Saturday morning at 6 a.m., the entrance to Oak Ridge Valley Plaza looked like an active municipal construction site. The contracting crew I hired had set up bright orange traffic cones, flashing warning lights, and heavy chain-link construction fencing along the boundaries of our 30-foot strip of land. A flatbed had unloaded a mid-sized excavator, and by 7:30 a.m., the asphalt had been jackhammered open. A deep 6-foot trench was being dug across the center of the road, exposing the old clay sewer pipes. Taped to the safety fence was a copy of our municipal utility permit and the judge's order, alongside a large sign cushion, Municipal Sewer, Repair in progress. Success road closed. The road was completely impassable at 8 a.m. The construction convoy hired by Vance Capital REIT arrived. Ryan Vance had scheduled a demolition crew to begin clearing the vacant retail units on the far side of the plaza to make way for the new luxury condo foundation. Two massive dump trucks and a flatbed carrying a heavy excavator idled on the shoulder of Oak Ridge Boulevard, their diesel engines rumbling. The lead driver got out, walked up to the construction fence, saw the trench, and immediately called his project manager. Within minutes, traffic on the main highway began to back up, creating a bottleneck as the trucks blocked the right lane. Then came the red sports car. Ryan Vance pulled onto the gravel shoulder, his tires kicking up dust. He got out of the car, adjusting his cuffs. He wasn't screaming or waving his arms like a child. He was pale, tense, and trying to maintain his corporate composure. He marched up to the construction fence, his leather shoes stepping over the gravel. I was sitting on the porch of our diner, holding a thermos of coffee, watching the crew work. Vance saw the trench, saw the workers in hard hats, and then saw me. He walked up to the edge of the fence. His jaw clenched. "Arthur," he said, his voice tight and controlled. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just dig up a commercial access road. We have a construction schedule to keep." "Morning, Ryan," I said, walking down the porch steps to the fence. "Just fixing a sewer leak. The clay pipes under here are 50 years old and leaking wastewater. We have a city utility permit to excavate and repair it." "This is a bad faith tactic," Vance said, his eyes narrowing. "You're doing this to block my demolition crew. We can sue you for tortious interference. Our legal team will file an emergency injunction to force you to backfill this trench immediately." I pointed to the copy of the court order taped to the fence. "Judge Ramirez already reviewed the engineering reports yesterday. She ruled that a potential environmental hazard takes precedence over your construction schedule. We have 14 days to complete the repairs under the court order. If your contractors touch this fence or try to fill this trench, they'll be violating a court order and trespassing on private property." Vance was about to reply when a Contra Costa sheriff's cruiser pulled up, its lights flashing. A deputy got out, adjusted his belt, and walked over to the fence. Vance immediately stepped forward, trying to control the narrative. "Deputy, this man has dug a trench across the primary entrance to my commercial property, blocking our construction vehicles and causing a traffic hazard on the highway." The deputy looked at the trench, then at the city permit and the signed court order on the fence. He read the documents carefully, then looked at Vance. "Sir," the deputy said, "this is a valid civil court order signed by a superior court judge. It clearly suspends your right-of-way over this specific tract of land. According to this document, the property owner has the legal right to secure this area." "But my trucks!" Vance yelled, pointing at the highway. "My project!" "That's a civil matter between your lawyers and his," the deputy replied, his voice flat. "But what isn't a civil matter is those dump trucks blocking a public lane on Oak Ridge Boulevard. You need to tell your drivers to move them immediately, or I'm going to start writing citations for blocking traffic." Vance stared at the deputy, his composure slipping. Just then, Vance's phone started ringing. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, and his face went completely white. I could hear the faint, angry voice of Thomas Vance, the chairman of the board, coming through the speaker. The REIT's primary lender had just frozen all funding draws for the $15 million development loan. The bank's underwriters had flagged the active title dispute on the access road and the civil fraud lawsuit we had filed the day before. On top of that, I had spent Friday afternoon coordinating with Henderson and the Patels. Since Vance had locked them out using the same fraudulent safety inspector, they had joined our lawsuit as co-plaintiffs. We were suing Vance Capital REIT for civil conspiracy, fraud, and constructive eviction. The local newspapers had already picked up the story. Local strip mall tenants sue mega REIT over fraudulent safety closures. Fidelity National Title, the title insurance company, was panicking. They had realized that if the easement was permanently revoked due to the NNN covenant breach, they would have to pay a massive multi-million-dollar claim to the REIT. They had already notified the REIT's board that they were stepping in to negotiate a settlement, and they were refusing to cover any of the REIT's daily construction standby fees. Without bank funding, and with contractor standby fees costing $15,000 a day, Vance Capital was bleeding money by the minute. Vance hung up the phone, looking completely defeated. He looked at me through the wire mesh of the construction fence. "Arthur," he said, his voice quiet, "let's be reasonable. We can settle the NNN dispute. We can sign a new agreement. Just backfill the trench and let the demolition crew through. Talk to my lawyer, Ryan, I said, turning back toward the diner. We'll see you at the settlement table. 5 days after we excavated the access road, we were sitting in the main conference room of Marcus Sterling's Oakland law office. The atmosphere was tense. On our side of the mahogany table sat Marcus, my dad, and myself. On the other side were Sarah Jenkins, the chief legal officer of Vance Capital REIT, Thomas Vance, the chairman of the board, and 2 senior claims attorneys from Fidelity National Title. Ryan Vance sat at the far corner of the table. His expensive suit looked rumpled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he kept his gaze fixed on the table. Their outside counsel opened a thick folder and tried to start with an aggressive opening statement, arguing about the public utility nature of the access road and claiming they could file for eminent domain. Sarah Jenkins raised her hand, cutting him off. She had spent the last 48 hours reviewing the 1925 deed and the photos of the chained doors. She was a professional, and she knew a losing hand when she saw one. Let's stop the posturing, Jenkins said, closing her folder. We are facing a quiet title action on our only access road, a frozen $15 million development loan, and a massive wrongful lockout claim under California Civil Code 789.3. If this goes to trial, our title insurance won't cover us because of the survey exclusion, and we will be liable for treble damages and attorney fees. We are here to settle. Thomas Vance, the elderly chairman of the board, looked across the table at my dad. Mr. Pendleton, Thomas said, his voice soft but firm. I want to personally apologize to you and your family. The actions taken at Oak Ridge Valley Plaza do not reflect how this company operates. It was a massive failure of oversight. He turned his head slightly toward his nephew. To that end, the board of directors met yesterday evening. We have terminated Ryan Vance's employment with Vance Capital REIT, effective immediately, for gross negligence and unauthorized illegal actions. Ryan Vance didn't say a word. He just swallowed hard and looked down at his hands. Thomas Vance slid a 3-page document across the table to Marcus. Here are our settlement terms. Marcus and I read through the document. The REIT was offering a complete resolution package. First, Vance Capital REIT would purchase the fee-simple title of the 30-foot access road from our family for $800,000. Second, they would buy out the remaining 6 years of our diner's lease for $1,200,000, which represented 5 times the diner's annual net profit, plus relocation expenses. Third, they would pay $500,000 in damages for the wrongful lockout, lost revenue, and spoiled inventory. The total settlement was $2.5 million, but I wasn't finished. I pointed to a blank section on the document. We have one more condition. The lockout affected every tenant in that plaza. You will waive all disputed NNN charges for Henderson's Hardware and Patel's Dry Cleaners. You will allow them to either remain in their spaces with 0 NNN increases for the next 3 years, or you will offer them fair buyout packages of at least $300,000 each to help them relocate. Sarah Jenkins looked at Thomas Vance. The chairman nodded once. We can agree to those terms, Jenkins said. We will draft the addendum now. I looked at my dad. The stress that had carved deep lines into his face over the past few weeks seemed to melt away. He gave me a slow, proud nod, his hand steady as he patted my shoulder. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the dotted line. 3 months later, Pendleton's Oak Ridge Grill reopened in a beautiful, historic brick building in downtown Walnut Creek. We had a state-of-the-art kitchen, a spacious dining room, and our own private parking lot, one that was fully registered, surveyed, and owned in fee simple by our family with no easements attached. My dad still comes in every morning to check the brisket and chat with the regulars. Many of our old customers from the plaza make the 10-minute drive to eat here, and Henderson and the Tells, who both took the relocation buyouts, are regulars at the corner booth. As for Oak Ridge Valley Plaza, the redevelopment project eventually went ahead. But the delay cost Vance Capital REIT over $2 million in interest, contractor penalties, and legal fees on top of our settlement. They built their luxury apartments, but Ryan Vance wasn't there to see it. Last I heard, he was working as a junior leasing agent for a small property firm in Bakersfield, far away from any corporate boards. Sometimes people think that in business, the biggest player always wins. They think money and high-priced lawyers can overwrite history, but sometimes all it takes to bring down a giant is a stubborn family, a spreadsheet, and a piece of paper from 1925.